is Victor DeVille, and I work for St. Nicholas Sky University, and also seated on the Treaty Council. Some of my missions are to be able to educate our people and other people about the Black Hills, the Badlands, and these landscapes. And the question is that was asked is what aspects of flora, fauna, geology, and cultural natural history story move me the most and why. The aspects of flora or plant nations that fascinate me are contained in oral stories of how medicinal plants became known to us by animals such as the black-footed ferret and the grizzly bear, just to name a few. When injured, the black-footed ferret would choose a plant called Idopta Sapa Pejuta. And the black-footed ferret, we call it the stripe across the face. That's what translates out. So when it's injured, it usually chews the plant, and it will chew it, and it will cuddle around it, and it will press against its body, the part that hurts. And then the bear, we always observe the bear going out and then digging roots, plants, and then especially when they're sick, they go out and chew certain foods, certain roots. And so we take note of those, and that's how we learn to get medicine from them in other animals. Okay? So we do use those plants to soothe our body parts, and they only can grow in one place where a black-footed ferret lives, usually in that area. So. And I have to say around the Wind Cave is where you see a lot of that, where you find prairie dogs. And also we used to, a long time ago, hunt, and we still are attempting to do this is to hunt, specific animals for our cultural use, such as the ram or the bighorn sheep. We usually make war shirts or shirts for our leaders out of the ram. Two skins of ram will usually fit a person with this type. And so because of the qualities of the ram is that they're sure-footedness, and they can survive in really inclement weather, and they can go to places where other people cannot go. So our leaders try to get that power from them, and that's how they're able to use that effectively when they lead our people.
You have more time, Victor, if you'd like to say some more things about what moves you with the story.
Yeah, and also the thing that moves me about it is the geology of the area, and then how it applies to how landforms were created. And those are all spiritual things that evolved in the Black Hills, and we can equate them to oral stories. And you teach our children using much like stories that they're deep-rooted in the science, and they more or less kind of impact the children as they grow up and see those things. You learn something at a very young age, and you go, and as you grow older, you begin to add more information about what you have learned. For instance, the Devil's Tower, that when 7 girls were chased by a bear, they went to a rock, and the rock, the spiritual power above told them go to a rock, and they went there, and the land uplifted. And then the giant bear that chased them usually scraped along the walls of that, and that's how that. So we, as we tell children, they learn that. As they grow up, we learn that erosion is the bear that usually makes those marks on it. So those are some things that really interest me and kind of fascinate me as I know about them. As I learned from my elders, I try to teach them to the children and also to the students. So in that way, it kind of makes me kind of fascinated and happy to be able to explore many things in the Black Hills that are there, especially flora and fauna, and other aspects of geology, landforms that came, and also the natural history of it are important, because they also equate, I shall talk a little bit more about what is sacred above is sacred below, the connection that we make as we do observe these things and perform ceremonies based on that.
Thank you. Eric.
Hi, I'm Eric Abrahamson, economic and cultural historian by training, and have done a fair amount of work with organizations and institutions and communities around the country looking at their history, and particularly ways in which their history is shaping or can shape the future of their either organization or their life and community. So one of the things I'm very interested in is the way in which history shapes identity and the way in which people appropriate history. So here in the Black Hills, and I work all over the country, so I always kind of separate what I do mostly professionally elsewhere versus my life here in the community in the Black Hills. One of the things that's always intrigued me here is that there's a sense in the Black Hills that we are in some ways locked into a 19th century identity of ourselves. Both Indian and white tend to project manifestations of who we are that are locked into kind of 19th century iconography, whether it's in the clothes we wear or the kind of rituals that we celebrate. And I think this is not a bad thing because it's obviously a huge part of who we are. But it can be difficult for communities to deal with the present, if not the future, if we don't have ways of sort of projecting images of ourselves that take from the past and bring it into the future. So one of the things I'm very interested in is the way in which we talk about our 20th century history here in the Black Hills. And there are many things, deep tensions and conflicts within our community that we often don't talk about very well. One of the most obvious is the kind of experience of racial tension between white and Indian communities, not just in the 19th century when there was open conflict, but in the 20th century when patterns of relationships, institutional relationships, were hardened and shaped the ways in which people live their daily lives. So we don't talk very much about the reservation's economic relationship to places like Rapid City. We don't talk very much about the ways in which farmers and ranchers used Indian land during the Depression, for example, to survive because the grass was better down there. We don't talk very much about the legacies of boarding schools for the whole culture and not just for the Indian community, for example. But there are other conflicts that we also don't talk about very much here that are an important part of the 20th century in the Black Hills and western South Dakota. One of those is that we live in a wonderfully dramatic environment here, but that environment is also very harsh many times. And the story of the 20th century in western South Dakota is in large part a story of out-migration. Kathleen Norris in her book Dakota talks about the legacy of the fact that so many people have left and what that means for the people who have stayed and persisted on the land. And one of the things is that we sort of tend to bury the story of the people who have left because they're gone. And yet, in a lot of ways, that's one of the most important, the out-migration, the loss of population in this area over the last century has been an important part of our economic and cultural story. So one of the things I'm really looking for in what the artists do with these sculptures is find a way to take the values from the past that are represented in both cultures, particularly that are so anchored in the land, that are deep spiritual values that are abiding, but find a way to translate them for the 21st century so that we have images and icons that, again, are linked to those values, but have a sense of present and future. I think, and I'll just say one last thing, I think Americans sometimes when they celebrate the past tend to have a tendency to want to freeze the past and just see that moment frozen in time. And one of the things I've always been intrigued by about Europeans, for example, when you go to Europe and see historic preservation, you'll see a castle or something, but with a very modern piece of sculpture, and there's a way in which those pieces of the physical presence of those things talks to each other. And I think we sometimes are a little more challenged to be able to do that kind of thing. We want very literal representations that take us back to the past, to associate with the past. And I would hope we find a more figurative way to do that.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'm Mavis Madison. I'm a bronze artist, sculptor, fourth generation here in the Black Hills. I think the story that would move me the most would be the cultural history of the area. My grandfather started the first professional rodeo in South Dakota. He rode with Buffalo Bill Cody as part of his troupe, and when he came back from that experience, he was a very colorful man, had a great deal of passion for the spirit of the West, but also a newfound love and passion for the Native American people whom he traveled with during that time. They had this tremendous sense of humor and inbred, deep in the heart, love for the land and people. And he was very moved by that, and he started producing rodeos in the 5-state area. Anywhere or any place, anyone would allow it. And oddly enough, right at the corner there where the sculptures are, or will be, he rode in open on Main Street. Any place they could buck out a horse and have a rodeo and place a bet, that's where you would find him. In later years, he started a rodeo guest ranch west of Rapid City, and he continued to perform rodeos and also powwows. At invitation, many powwows were held there, and I was fortunate enough to experience that as a child and get to know and understand the Native culture and really how, well, as my dad always said, there'd never be any cowboys without the Indians, and I think that's really true. My father in 1963 was given an honorary title for chief, Hetopa, Four Horns. It's just a very beautiful, colorful story of the West, a very hard life, but yet a very romantic life. And I hope that parts of that can also be projected into what they're doing, because it is a very real part of the beginning of the Rapid City area. So I guess that's what I would like to see. Parts of that projected too, and that bonding, that correlation of the American cowboy and the Native people. I think they go hand in hand, and I hope that that's projected.
Thanks, Mavis.
My name is Craig Howell. I'm the director for the Center for American Indian Research and Native Studies, a research center down on Pine Ridge Reservation. The part of the story that moves me the most is this idea of storytelling itself, that we humans are storytellers, and that we do that with our voices and our written words and our artistic expressions, whether those are architecture or song, dance, painting, and sculpture. And these stories, I think, are what these are those threads of webs. I like to think these are these threads of webs that tie us to the here and now. But they also tie us to that trajectory of time and to the power of place. So it's not just the past or just the present or even the future, but these stories are what make us fully human and what link us to time and place and to ancestors and to entities. So cultural storytelling then is what makes us fully human, and therefore I think that's the strength, or that's what moves me about this the Main Street Square project. And that story of place, or this idea of storytelling, I think we have to tie it to this place. And we've been mentioned the Black Hills and the Badlands and Rapid City. Well, and we've mentioned Indians and non-Indians and cowboys, and it's good to remember that there's a lot of Indian cowboys, so those aren't equal or opposites. One's a profession and one's an ethnicity. So we can have lawyers that are Indians and we can have astronauts that are Indians. And this idea of place, though, there's only one people who can say this is where they emerged. No one else can say that. That's not shared. Only Lakotas can say our ancestors emerged here at this place, up there at a place called Wind Cave. So that's unique. And that history underlies this place. And we can ignore it, and a lot of people do. Or we can acknowledge it. And it doesn't have to be celebrated necessarily, but it needs to be acknowledged. And that's the history of this place. And I think on this page 1 there, where I have this timeline, I just did a little calculation here. If you had a 12-inch ruler, the last eighth of an inch is when Rapid City was founded, right? So we're talking about, and if 12 inches ago being 16,000 years ago, that's how long Indians have been here. Minimum. The most conservative archaeologists, I think, would say 16,000 years, plus or minus. 16,000 years versus 136 years. That's not equitable. And so I think the potential of the Main Street Square project is to acknowledge that. We don't have that acknowledged anywhere. People try really hard to be fair, meaning equal. These things aren't equal. There's a differentiation between certain people in this place and other peoples in this place. So I hope that can be, at least that the artists are aware of it, how that's their job. But I'd like to encourage them to be cognizant of this story of this place, how they want to realize that. We can talk, I have other ideas on how to do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. David?
So I'm Dave Odie. I'm a botanist. Do we have 3 minutes here?
3.5.
I'll just. As a biologist, I write stories about plants and what aspects of the flora, fauna, geology move me the most. Well, it takes a very insignificant creature to even move me, but the story that needs to be told, as a botanist, I'm probably the one to tell it, is what makes these hills black, what is the sapa of the Paha Sapa, and that is ponderosa pine. And I don't believe you can overstate the importance of ponderosa pine to the first prehistoric peoples who lived here during the Pleistocene in the southern hills and left their petroglyphs for people to see, or the Plains tribes who came here and got teepee posts. Certainly the miners that first came to the Black Hills, my ancestors in eastern South Dakota were able to build houses out of sod, but the miners that delved into the Black Hills after gold could not have held up those mines without the timbers of ponderosa pine. The placer miners, it takes a long time to sort out gravel from gold, but they were able to build sluices with that ponderosa pine. Many of us still live in stick pine homes, and for most of my lifetime, this next fact just continues to amaze me. Little Black Hills National Forest, for most of the years, the average timber production per year from Little Black Hills National Forest exceeded the entire production from all the rest of the forests in the Rocky Mountain region. That is, all the national forests in Colorado, 7 national forests in Colorado, 3 national forests in Wyoming. Little Black Hills National Forest, on the basis of average annual production, produced more timber. The main reason for that is most of those Rocky Mountain forests are so remote, they're so steep, they're so far from the mills. Here in the Black Hills, it's a much nicer geography, if you will, and it's easier to build roads. The Black Hills have a higher density of roads than eastern South Dakota. And there are consequences in the hills that we deal with today because of this major focus on timber production. The Black Hills have been managed, I would argue, as a pine farm, so to speak, which has led to problems. But I have one other comment about what aspects of the Black Hills move me, and that's it. When I come to the Black Hills and the Badlands, it is easier here than anywhere in the Northern Plains to see deeper into the past. It is easy, and I won't steal any Catherine's thunder in geology, but it's here in the hills when you can start to imagine what 10,000 years ago or 1,000,000 years ago might be. In the southern Black Hills, there was cycad National Monument. And these cycads, they're like short palm trees. And we presume that the dinosaurs grazed on them. They were deposited, they grew 100 million years ago. The Black Hills upthrust was about 50 million years ago. So these fossil plants in the southern hills are even older than the Black Hills themselves. So just being able to look back in time, here in the hills is a special place where that is easier than others. That's 4 minutes.
Excellent, thank you, David. Trudy?
My name is Trudy Akapee, and I'm the senior biologist for the Oglala Sioux Parks and Rec Authority in Kyle, South Dakota on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And my background is in wildlife biology and range ecology. I guess when I look at that question about the story, things come to me in fours, maybe because I come from a background of Euro-American upbringing and education, but I've lived on the reservation for 16 years, worked in the Black Hills and in the Badlands quite extensively with my degree programs and with the animals there. So things come to me in fours, and so what I'd like to convey to the artists that will be working on this is that these four things that come in fours, they can kind of group them together, is we talk about the pre-culture of people before people really were a focal point in the environment. And then you talk about the buffalo culture of the native people. And then you talk about the cowboy culture, or the culture of where cattle became kind of the king. And now we're talking about, I guess, could be the technology culture that we're in now. Some of that, all of the rest of the culture still exists to some degree, but that's a four I think of when I look at this story. The other four that I look at is the grass, or the plants, the wildlife, fire. Played a big component in how this environment was shaped, and still does. And the water. The rivers, the streams, the springs. Another four that comes to mind is the rocks, the geology. The wind or the air, the climate that shapes us from the hot summer days to the very cold winters, and then to the live ones, the things that breathe. Those are in fours. We also talk about the spirit, the culture, the physical, and the emotional or intellect in fours. So those are things that I think about in the story of this area. One of the things, though, my children are Lakota German descent, and so to convey to the people that will be seeing these sculptures that there is a rich history of both the native people here and of the immigrants that came in, and how to portray that both of those cultures have a deep impact on the environment. My children powwow, but they rodeo. My children drum, but they also listen to rap music. Those are just part of what's the whole environment of this area. So when I think to talk to the sculptures that'll be working on this, I think about the spirit of that piece of rock. Ask it what it wants to become. Feel the song or the dance of that rock. And if they can convey that somehow on how we are visiting about this, I think that would be very important.
Thank you, Judy. Michelle?
My name is Michelle Lentz, and I'm the Executive Director of the Rapid City Convention and Visitors Bureau. And from what I'm hearing, I'm going to be talking not so much about the history of the Black Hills and Rapid City, but perhaps a little bit more about the future and the economic significance of the Main Street Square as we see it. The mission, of course, of the Convention and Visitors Bureau is to bring visitors and convention delegates to Rapid City, again for the economic impact or the significance and the economic livelihood for the entire community. And so I think it's so important. But speaking of the history, the historic downtown that we have is absolutely the heart and soul of Rapid City, and we understand that. And we have some stunning architecture, and we have a vibrant arts community, and we have exceptional dining and shopping anymore in our area. We have life-size bronze U.S. presidents that are the cornerstone of our city center. Again, with the historic buildings and the flowers and the landscaping and the fountains that we now have, that's all the stage for the environment that we have to showcase our city to all of our visitors. And of course, we're the fortunate ones that get to live here and experience it every day. The people downtown are now able to be immersed in a lot of activities and educational opportunities which we have not had in the past for them, not only in Rapid City, but of course in all of the Black Hills and all of the attractions up at Mount Rushmore and Crazy Horse and the numerous family attractions that we have. So we're again very fortunate to have some of these educational opportunities for our visitors, and I believe that especially in the process of the Sculptors being downtown in Main Street Square is going to be absolutely an engaging experience, again, for our visitors and for our locals. And we're just hoping that this will become truly the third icon and a reason for people to come to Rapid City and not just make it a travel through to get to another destination, but a reason for people to actually come to Rapid City and the Black Hills and stay a few days and experience and enjoy everything that we do every day.
Thanks, Michelle. Catherine?
I'm Catherine Johnson, and I'm going to be talking about the geology of the area and how it's our foundation for the economy and the lifestyle that we enjoy. And has been mentioned previously by some of the speakers that starting with the natives people, when they first found the Black Hills very important and very special, and also even named them, this sense of uniqueness and specialness has been found with all of us that live and visit here. And in fact, any of you that drives in from any direction and sees the Black Hills rising from the prairies knows what I'm talking about with this sense of specialness that this place imparts. But the Black Hills is this very unique oval-shaped geologic feature, and it's the schematic of it can be found on page 3 of the materials. It's about 60 miles east-west, 120 miles north-south, and yet the rocks that you see when you're driving around date back to 2 billion years. And within 30 miles, the elevation rises from over 4,000 feet to the highest point at Harvey Peak, which is over 7,000 feet. And it's really the geologic history behind this big mountain of rocks that makes the Black Hills the Black Hills. And so the contemporary history of the Black Hills and Rapid City really began with the publicized gold discovery in 1874. Gold that would not have been had it not been for geology. And yet these gold deposits in the Black Hills, they're over 2 billion years old. But those rocks with their gold could have very easily just stayed buried, and no one would have known about them if it were not have been for the Black Hills uplift. And so perhaps just a brief geologic story of the Black Hills is in order. So just imagine sometime about 2.5 billion years ago to about 500 million years ago, this area was a big lake with a very muddy bottom. And at the beginning of this period, there was this time of volcanoes and a lot of tectonic activities that thrust up this igneous rock through this muddy bottom. And due to the heat and the pressure of this activity, the mud at the bottom became what is known as our schist rock that we see throughout the Black Hills today. And examples of this igneous rock that was thrust through are the Little Elk Creek granite, which is a beautiful granite exposed in an absolutely beautiful canyon on the northwest flank of the Black Hills, and the Harney Peak granite, which of course formed our tallest mountain, but also provided the canvas for Crazy Horse and Mount Rushmore. But in addition to providing the granite that really host these features that are the backbone of our tourist industry, the tectonic activity 2 billion years ago put the gold into the schist that's been mined near Lead and Deadwood for over 135 years. But the gold in the granites would have never been discovered had it not been for later geologic processes. So after more than 1 million years of this Precambrian, it was called, that was the era that this happened, of erosion, once again this area was covered with water. It became a sea. And so from about 500 million years back, forward to about 60 million years, over 8,000 feet of sediments were laid down in this ocean, at the ocean's bottom. And now, over time, these sediments become the rocks that we see around us, the sandstones and the limestones. But about 60 million years ago, something very big happened. That was the Black Hills uplift. And just imagine the pressure that it took to push the earth up to create that oval shape that's the Black Hills today. But the land surface that we see today took 60 million years to form through process of erosion. And this erosion did several things that we probably take for granted. First of all, the erosion uncovered these really historic ancient rocks that host the home state gold. And they carved these really deep canyons where all the creeks that flow from the Black Hills, carrying the rain and the snow from these higher elevations flow. And these creeks, they're the ones that recharge our aquifers, so we have water to drink. They provide the irrigation to these fertile prairies around the base of the Black Hills. And these canyons provide the habitat for very important species of flora and fauna, as well as provide the most pleasant hiking experiences you'll ever imagine. And they're the places for our lakes. But in addition to this, the erosion from the Black Hills is what washed all this material downstream, and it was deposited to form the Badlands, which has been mentioned by some. And once again, it offered the perfect habitat for the plants and the animals that today are only known by their fossil remains.
Thank you so much. What I'd like to do now is to open the discussion more to an interactive conversation around question 2. And again, question 2 is, in what ways do these areas, again, the flora, the fauna, the geology, and the natural and cultural history intersect in vital ways? And I'd just like to Craig, would you be willing to just start us off? And you didn't know you were going to do this, but and just begin a conversation between us about the ways that we can see these areas vitally intersecting. And again, I just open for people just to jump in and add to that discussion. And Craig, are you willing to lead off in that area?
Sure, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
I would start with this idea of footprint. And I like that because it puts the humans in here, in the landscape. And if we're going to integrate the flora, the fauna, and the cultural and geology and cultural and natural history, we have to have humans. So we can't go back to that long time ago before humans. So that narrows down our time frame here. There's got to be humans here, so we're talking 20,000 years or less if we're going to integrate all these together. And I think it's just fascinating that, again, if you have that 16,000 years, and that's 12 inches, the humans that were here for 11 and 15 sixteenths or 7/8 of that ruler had a puny footprint. Puny. We can't find it, basically. Those humans that have been here for this last 1/8 of an inch have a huge footprint. We're going to find it, our descendants will find it 10,000 years from now. And that's the difference. Two things, that's this idea of the footprint of what we culturally do, and culturally meaning humanly do. And that we can see that whether it's in mining, right? We've ripped whole hills, we've flattened whole hills here. We've took the tops off for the love of gold. We've killed species, exterminated species for safety, because we humans could live in the environment in a safer way. We've eradicated species of plants. All this in this last 1/8 of an inch. So this is the history. These are the facts. And whether the artists use them or not, I don't know. But I think it's imperative that they know that. You can come in here with the idea of all the fuzziness of culture and of the history of this place, the quote-unquote history of this place, and I think delve into stereotypes or superficial ways of representing these processes that have been put in place for 16,000 years, but have a tremendous footprint now in our day and then going forward for millennia. I don't know.
Thank you. Comments? Your ideas about, again, the ways that these things intersect. Yes, Victor.
I'd like to kind of focus on the landforms, geology, the flora and fauna. And if you take a look at the page 6 of your handout there, this kind of gives us the idea to interconnect, this idea of intersecting, of what is above and what is below in all the life forms that are part of the whole process of these ceremonies. If you look at the beginning with the spring equinox, if you look at on the far right, upper right of your image there, you see this Chanshasha Ipuzie, which is the dried willow constellation. It's made up of two constellations, Triangulum and Aries. Putting those together, when the sun enters that area, it's the vernal equinox. And it's the beginning of the ceremonial activity. We call that Chanshasha Ipuzie because when the sun enters that, it becomes spring, and then people go out and they start collecting the bark off the inner bark of the willow, and they make tobacco mix to begin this ceremony of the pipe ceremonies. And then about 30 days later, as they prepare, they start moving towards the Black Hills, wherever they're at. So depicted there is that teepee there. When they see that, then they start moving towards the Black Hills, wherever you're at, east, west, north, or south, and you begin your journey to Black Hills. You target Harney Peak. That's the where we're going to go, or the area that is the highest point there. And then you begin to welcome back the thunders, the ceremonies. And that's to wake up Grandmother Earth, the landforms, the life forms that are there, so they'll awaken and then begin the process of growing and revitalizing themselves. So we do that. That's what we do. We welcome back the thunders. And we just completed that about a couple of months ago when the vernal equinox came. And then, so we see a creature there surrounded in that circle. That's the racetrack. That's part of what's called the uplift of the Black Hills, is this racetrack. That's what that's called. And you see a creature coming out there, and that's the creature could be a mammal or a human. But that is the three parts of a buffalo coming out. It actually also depicts us as part of that process. As we look at, on the left side, you see Wind Cave. That circle above there, and 8 stars that you see coming across the sky, and you can see that clearly, especially during winter. Then, so when the creature comes out of that, it's us coming out of that cave. And that connects us with what's up there. So people tell stories of that. How long ago? We never say long, long. We say 3,600 years ago, because when the sun entered the Chanshashi Buze, it's 3,600 years ago. What you do is you take the wobble of the Earth every 72 years and multiply 50 degrees, the space of that, and then you come up with 3,600 years. The star knowledge was done because of cleansing. It goes back 20,000 years ago when the spiritual power is angry with what we're doing on Earth, and they start putting these cleansing on us, much like worldwide. You see Noah's Ark, the flooding there, as a lot of things are going on that the humans were controlling, and so that's that story, a separate story unto itself. So that reminds us of this great connection. And you see the circle in the Black Hills is the red racetrack, so it reflects the racetrack above. And then when the sun, as the sun enters the Pleiades area, or we call that Winchincha Shakti, 7 girls. Reminds 7 girls that were devoured by a creature that came from the needles part, 7 needles of the Harney Peak. They came and they took babies from the unsuspecting parents, took them up there and devoured them. So that's a reminder that another way to protect our children. And also they're memorializing that in the Pleiades. So when the sun enters there, then the welcome back to the thunders. And then the sun, 30 days later, the sun will enter the center of the Black Hills, which is on Earth, Reynolds Prairie. And you see the image of that on the landforms. When you enter that, then the people welcome all life and peace. I think we'll be going to fairly soon. One thing about this whole process, this interaction kind of upset us. That's why people have moved out of Black Hills, because of precession, which every 72 years when Earth wobbles on the axis, it throws back the constellation 1 degree. Over years, 3,600 years, and then that's a long time. You see. So because we're now a month behind, we now catch up. So that's when the sun enters that, that constellation, we go back to the center of the Black Hills, which is really a medicine wheel at the center. And then when the sun enters the next constellation, which is Gemini, or we call Matotipila, that represents Devil's Tower. And we're trying to change that name back to Matotipila. So when the sun enters there, and it's the greatest of all ceremonies, the sun dance. And that is where the people used to go continuously until we were put on reservations. And I believe we had one in 1980 to restart that process. But Sundance has now begun on all reservations when the summer solstice comes, when the sun enters the Gemini or Chanshashi Buze. And Sundance start there. It used to be held that 4 days across the tribes. Now it begins the ceremonies from the summer solstice all the way to August. Each reservation, there must be like Rosebud has about 20, Pine Ridge about 50 sun dances. So now we're looking at that interconnecting of our people. When they look up, and they see the things, when they see where the stars are, the constellations are, then they begin those ceremonies, and that's to help, to things to connect in harmony with what's above and what is below. So as we look at that, those are what draws us, what makes us connect to those areas, and we're restricted because of reservation systems. Yet we're because we have freedom to come up here every now and then. That's why I usually come almost 7 times a year. I come here, usually ceremonials or just to take my kids up here to know this place, to shop and take them out. And it would be great to see, the sculptures, if they would do something in the project, and it would be good to take the children there, see, rather than go. The Rapid City, the gateway, as people traveled a long time ago, they traveled there, all the ceremonies began, they went out to the Black Hills, and the Black Hill, the Rapid sits on the racetrack. And as people make our way through it, then we can enter 3 ways. One through, actually 4 ways. One through Rapid City, one south through Hot Springs, one north up to the Devil's Tower, and then east and west. So those are the 4 ways that we can enter as tribes come in. They would do that. So it gives you kind of, if you've ever been to that center of the Reynolds Prairie, it's a mound. It's unique because you have, the thunder usually knocks down everything there. So the forest is around. So you sit on it, you look all around, it's all bare. And then you see the altar up there. That was done 3,600 years ago. The altar there, and as we do the ceremonies, we put tobacco ties and for the ceremonies, and I think we're ready for the big one that's coming in 2012, that we'll be able to go up there and begin to talk about our plans with the spiritual powers above us and lead our tribe down the road of the goal that we set. So in a way that it brings life for us as we go and go to these ceremonies, it makes us stronger. Also inviting the non-Indians, a lot of them come down there. It's part of their obligation is to keep those the season in tune, and it's their obligation to partake in some of those ceremonies, so we'll all live in harmony.
Thank you. Other thoughts about the? Yes, Trudy.
When I think about tying these things together, I think about the collisions, the conflicts, the dynamics of the area, starting with like the uprising of the Black Hills or the formation of the Badlands, and how many times that happened, and how dynamic that is, and then how the plants and the animals and the species evolve, pushing each other around. Even plants do that. They push each other around to some degree, successionally. And then the people. The conflicts, the wars, coming from living at Wounded Knee for 16 years, feeling that energy that was there, kind of the pushing and shoving of species and people and rocks and waterways. That, what I feel in my background, it ties a lot of this together. Even from a cowboy and riding a bronc horse, there's a conflict there. There's a push and a shove. Who's going to win out? Or an animal attacking another animal to eat, or even a buffalo eating a piece of grass. There's something has to give, and to me, that's what I feel kind of ties the pieces together. Even in our environment or an economy here in this area, between the ranching, between the businesses, the tourism, the businesses competing and pushing and shoving, to make a living. So I wanted to share that.
Okay.
When I think about how all of these areas intersect, and both both the individual aspects, but also time-wise, how our history intersects with, and all the different all the different segments of history, and how they all come together, and where we're at today. The word that comes to my mind is the term that's probably overused these days, but it talks about sustainability. And I think that there's a recognition among a growing number of people that our job really now is to develop a sustainable present and future. And I don't think you can do sustainability in a way that's going to be meaningful without incorporating all of the different aspects that we talked about today. And in fact, I mean, the number where you begin oftentimes in sustainability is identify the things of value, and the things that we value from the cultural perspective, the things we value from the natural resource perspective, the things we value from the economic perspective, and we identify those things that we value. And I think that's what's been articulated very well around the table here, what we value. And then we've also learned a lot of lessons through time, and then those lessons need to be, that we've learned, lessons learned, needs to be superimposed upon what we value. And, working this through then starts creating a sustainable footprint, in how Craig put it. It may be a big footprint, but it's sustainable. And of course, this has to be updated all the time because things change. But our natural resources, that's what we were given, and we need to ensure that those natural resources will be able to sustain in our future in the same way that they've sustained the past.
Other thoughts? You see these things interacting, intersecting in vital ways. This has been very interesting hearing what you have to say. Other thoughts?
I just have to mention, what Victor was talking about, and if you look at the Black Hills and the satellite imagery, and how that shows, satellite imagery will show the different spots in the star knowledge. Have you ever seen that picture of that, how it connects? And that is very interesting, that connection. And that's like from the future, to the past. How did they know, that this, and the ceremonies that are associated with that?
Yeah.
Just add a few more things on it. If you look at the image again, you see two images in down on the landforms. You see a turtle image, and you see what looks to me like a lizard or a salamander. Those are important images that we use, to as our babies are first born. You take the umbilical cord, and then you make these creatures. And that gives them power. And of course, when it'll sustain your long life, because those creatures there, that's what they do. It's hard to kill a turtle. You chop it up and you take the heart, it still beats. Still got power. And then the lizard, it's hard to catch. You take it by the tail, it detach itself, and it'll grow back. So those are powerful images that have power, and we honor them for that as we go down. So the way that connects us with the earth as well as above, that creature you see above there also represents a salamander. And then the circle represents turtle shell, with I think 13 plates on which represent tectonic plates. It's not closer to the turtle, it's the one that moved the earth, and that's how it moves in the landform. So those are important lessons we teach our youth, and it's really to prevent them from taking their own lives, suicide. As Roseman has probably leads the world in suicides. And our answers to go to Black Hills, to these 13 sites, sacred sites, and I'll give you copies of those. And as I led 2 summers, we brought young kids up there from most reservations, and went to each of these sites, and then they were fascinated. So spirituality sometimes must be part of our life. We lose it, then we we turn to the other way, the darker side. That it's really important for us, to develop and nurture these things and develop them. And if the non-unions can play part, they could. Play a great part in this too, in these things that happen. So, in a way that it has potential for us in the future, as our youth will move closer to being spiritual, as we begin to lose it because the years of being acculturated, that we're given religion, forced to be Catholics or other Christians, and we tend to lose our traditional spirituality. Notice I never said that our spirituality is a religion. It's not. It's a way of life. That's the big mistake that people think that ceremonies would do. It's religious. It's just a way of life. And, so in a way that it's helpful to know those as sculptors look at these things and see how sensitive these things are, and see that they're able to be able to realize that as they start on our projects.
Victor, you brought up the word sensitive, and I think one of the questions I have around these intersects is where are some of the most sensitive aspects of those intersections? And David, I haven't heard from you for a while. Do you got any ideas about, there's some areas of intersection that I think are a little bit more sensitive than others, and I'm wondering if we could maybe just talk about those a bit.
I don't know that a botanist can jump into this kind of philosophical discussion.
Oh, I see.
But in investigating plants that are used by native people and sweetgrass, for example, had Europeans used sweetgrass in much the same way that Native Americans here use sweetgrass to purify. They scattered it on the doorsteps of churches. It was recognized, even coming from such different cultures, confronted by that plant, they found the same usefulness of it. And I'd like to think that nature does a job of bringing people together. Usually I'm in the wildlife, Trudy and I are in the wildlife management business, and there are many conflicts. Often those conflicts dissolve when you get people with differing views on the ground looking at the same, whether it's an issue of forage utilization or forest management. Once you get them on the ground, it's hard to carry your myths, which we all bring with us, when confronted with the realities on the ground, living creatures on the ground and how they respond to different management. Is there a way these sculptures can bring people together? Can we come up with any suggestions for these artists? For symbols? I don't know.
It's a good question.
Take some research.
Yeah. When you think about the idea of intersection, again, are there some ways that, again, we think about intersection? I guess it's their job to figure out the manifestation of it in the rock. But again, I haven't heard from some other people about your ideas about these ideas of the vital ways these areas intersect. And Eric.
Well, I'm going to back up a little bit and just be a little bit conceptual. I think one of the things that the artists, I think, should be very aware of, and from other museum projects that I've worked on or other interpretive projects I've worked on, there's always a tension when somebody's doing a project like this over audience. Who is this for? Is it for visitors who are coming to downtown, or is it for locals? And I think a big lesson learned in this community and other communities around the country is if you don't start by doing it for the locals, you'll never get the visitors. And that it has to be first for the people who live here. It has to succeed for them. If it succeeds for them, then it will succeed for visitors. Often there's this idea, we'll build it for the tourists and they'll come, and it doesn't matter what the locals think. I think that's always been a big mistake. Then I think in terms of the challenge they face, there's the challenge of kind of the physical quality of what they create, which will have an aesthetic presence and a visceral connection to the people who come, versus kind of what we've all been talking about in a lot of ways is the narrative quality. And what will that narrative quality be? And when we talk about storytelling, like Craig was talking about, Craig talked about it as a web, which is sort of it's sort of translated a physical concept that he's giving it, you know. But I think most of us also think of storytelling as having some inherent qualities to it, and one is tension. You know, and tension comes from conflict. And most of us who like stories want to see conflict, want to see tension. We don't necessarily need to see winners and losers, but we need to see some sense of the way in which conflict leads to resolution. And I think that if there's a manifestation in the way we do narrative, that we show the conflict, because that's what people want. They want to see the conflict because they know it's there. They don't like it when it's hidden. When they have the sense that people don't want to talk about it, then they feel like whatever's created is superficial and does not have substance. But I think as Craig is pointing out, when he says, you know, things have to be acknowledged, that the conflict has to be visible. And there has to be some sense of resolution, like where it's come to. It may not be perfection, it may not be they're all happily ever after, but a sense of where it's come to. And the other thing that I think about a lot as a writer in storytelling is not only conflict, but also the search for identity. We joke in our house that the classic ending to a Hollywood movie now, it used to be, you know, that boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl. You know, that was kind of the classic plot structure to the movie. And that was all about conflict and overcoming conflict. But now, that if you watch, probably 80% of Hollywood movies end with one person in a crowd and everybody's applauding for that person. And it's because so much of us, and actually this goes back to Greek traditions in drama, that what really compels us from a narrative point of view is the search for identity. We want to know who we are and be recognized for who we are. And so there's a powerful tension, a powerful dramatic narrative that is involved in the search for identity that, you know, I think is a lot of what we are searching for in this community, is a sense of, well, who are we really today? And again, it doesn't have to come to a kind of sense of completion or finality. But if the visitor or the person experiencing the sculpture can be part of the process of discovery, and I think one of the things is in interpretive that we always look for is how can the viewer find themselves in the narrative experience, whether they're local or whether they're not local. If they can identify with the experience and find some path to their own sense of identity, then it'll work. It'll be powerful. So I, just would summarize by saying that I think conflict has to be embedded, and it needs to lead to some resolution, even if it doesn't lead to judgment. And I think Craig is kind of implying this, that it shouldn't lead to judgment, because that's always going to be in the minds of the beholder. It's going to change over time. But if you're truthful about the facts and acknowledge things, then you have a path for people. And the second is that it should be about who we are as a people and who we are as a place.
And that leads me to a question related to intersect, because it's a complicated history. It's not a simple history. Either geologically, it's a complicated history, biologically, culturally. So I'm interested, Mavis, from your point of view around these intersects. We're still on this question.
It's like you just said, it is so vastly diverse.
Yeah.
And a person that's never been to this area, well, I can only give an example. I had a superior come from D.C. To kind of overlook what was going on in a project. She landed in Sioux Falls and had to travel to 4 different offices across the state, ending with mine. By the time she got here, she was literally horrified. I only in the vastness of all of it getting here, she didn't know that places like this still existed, that were so open and so vast, and then so dramatically different in a 20-mile space. Just overcome by all of it. Did not realize there were places like this. But it is so diverse, and like you said, everything from the landscape to the people that were drawn here. They all just kind of mesh right here. And with that is the result of a lot of things that the panelists are talking about today. You just have to be here and experience it. And I think for us that do live here, and you only know that and sense that because you are here, there is a true sacredness about this part of the country, because you'll never experience anything like this anywhere else.
And for an artist who's never been here, how do we explain that intersect between place and spirit? And I don't know. Michelle, you have not spoken. Do you have any ideas about, talking again about the idea of the vital ways that these areas, all these different fauna, flora, geology, natural and cultural history intersect?
Well, I'm just going to expand a little bit on what Mavis said. I think that we here, I've been in the business for 26 years, and my perspective comes from the visitor, even more so than the community. I certainly hear the community side of it as well, but I've had one experience like yours where someone came from the East Coast, and we drove her through the Badlands coming to Rapid City, and she absolutely had to get out of the car, and she took probably 15-20 minutes to walk through the Badlands and just stopped, and it was a very moving experience for her, and she came back with tears on her face, and she had never seen anything like it in her life. And so I do see and hear some of those experiences, but I also hear the experiences of the visitors, international visitors as well as domestic people that come to our, not only Mount Rushmore and Crazy Horse and those attractions, but our museum, and they find it to be one of the best that they've ever seen in their lifetime, in their travels. And we don't necessarily hear that from the community. So there is a sensitivity from locally, I believe, that we do have to keep in mind that we were talking about earlier. But on the other hand, when you have people that have never been here, and we as a community are so comfortable with it and perhaps take some of these things for granted, and we listen to these people that are coming from everywhere in the world, and they're saying we have a magnificent city and area, and the Black Hills are something that they could have never imagined. So from a visitor perspective, again, I think we're very fortunate with what we have.
And how we put language to some of these things that are kind of what I call between language. It's our experience. I'm just curious, again, I think some of you have put it very eloquently, but how we can give that sense, that intersect between, well, it's a place, but then it's much more than a place. That idea that all these areas come together into something that's very unique. And I'm curious if anybody has any language that they think they could put to that, to be able to talk to the artists about that. How do we talk about this place, but then it's that other way we talk about it, it's the place. Any thoughts about that intersection?
Well, one thought, and this is a little bit in jest, but when I hear it, I always think that, in jest, there's always a little truth. And, I hear, and I do it myself, refer to the Black Hills area and it was God's country. You never hear that when they talk about Sioux Falls. You never hear it when people are headed to Aberdeen. But out here, we just sort of take it for granted that this is God's country. And I think that actually says, what I think of when I hear that or use it is really what you were saying, that it is a place, but it's really more than a place. And it has all of these layers, and it has kind of what it does to our heart, and it has what it does to our sense of history and our sense of how we fit into very, very long, whether it be cultural history or geologic history, but how we fit in all that. And so for me, that little phrase does capture it.
But a couple things I want to say about that. One thing is, it's amazing that we can call it God's country and do what we do to it.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't do that to our sacred structures. You can climb on any of the mountains, but you can't climb on Mount Rushmore. So I think maybe people think that that's God's monument, but if this is God's country, why are we strip mining it? Why are we doing all these? Why do we harvest more timber out of Gesapa or Black Hills than in all these others combined? I mean, we have really nice rhetoric, but I think with logic or critical thinking, we have a hard time backing it up with our actions. And this idea of identity, a couple things are just kind of in my mind. One is this idea of the miner's canary, that intersection of species that you're sacrificing that canary so that you can live, right? So you bring it down. It's a bird that flies. You take it down in the air and you take it down underground, and if it dies, you have to hurry up and get out. But it sacrifices itself so you can live, whether it's doing it conscious on its purpose or with the good intentions. I doubt it. We have some indicator species up here, maybe like frogs. I think our indicator species of water quality is what I've been told. That poisons that come in, the frogs have very permeable skins, and so those poisons will kill them off right away. So if there's a lot of frogs around, you have a healthy local ecosystem. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but this idea of indicator species that are tied to here. I want to make sure we say that maybe, as far as I know, there's 23 different American Indian tribes that recognize the Black Hills. It's not a Lakota thing, and that's the importance of diversity. This isn't a Lakota a place. This was a place to many tribes, and they see it differently. And the best example of that, this idea of multiple stories and intersections, is Manto Tipila, or what we call in English Devil's Tower. And anytime you see a place called Devil's Tower, you could just take that as a sacred place to American Indians. This is what the locals do. They take sacred places and call them Hell's Canyon, Devil's Tower, Devil's Lake, these bad names. In God's country, that's what they call them. So that's kind of this bigger history. And the locals, when they identity, I would say look at these these images from page 2, right? American Progress is the top left one. The locals seen that. That's what they seen themselves as. Moving across the continent from west to east, God's light, the divine right. Indians scurrying away in the shadows. Natural animals scurrying away in the shadows. That's what the locals see, and this is what we have a problem. We want to have the locals have an identity here, is that the history of local identity is kind of detrimental to the big picture. The one below it, the bottom left, is a picture that hangs in our state capitol. It's called Spirit of the West. You can see the Badlands in the back and the covered wagons coming under that outstretched arm. And where's the Indians? They're being trampled. That's the local identity. This is the danger of getting the locals to buy in first, because we go, who's going to be the locals? And we have examples here of ways of representing wrongly the totality of who the locals are, who has power, who has a place at the table. So this is the challenge with identity, is not the identity of one group, but the identity of the people at a place, and having some broad thinking to say, let's deal with that. Maybe the identities of these plants and the identities of these animals and the identities of these humans, but plurals. And I think this is kind of where I'm trying to go with this idea of indicator things, whether they're species of animals or indicators, maybe there's species of plants, and this idea of introduction. You introduce species that could be detrimental.
Yes. It's not an easy topic.
No.
It's not uncomplicated. We have 5 more minutes before we take a break. And I'm just wondering, any other ideas or thoughts, again, about, we're really talking about these vital intersections, because this isn't one story, it's not from one perspective, it's not about one particular aspect. This is quite challenging, I would think, as an artist, to think about this. Last thoughts that, Trudy, what other kinds of thoughts do you have about this before we move on?
Well, why do people stay? You know, I'm sure all of us in our professional careers have had the opportunities to go somewhere else. But why did we stay here? And why don't we leave? You know, that's and you know, you're faced with that challenge. Maybe we could have done more academics or more business somewhere else, but we chose to stay here because of its sense of that glory, that beauty, that inner, that spirituality that connects you. And some people are probably more connected than others.
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably a more recent person coming to the area. I mean, just came from the south in Nebraska, but still, you know, you came up here, and when you talk about the first time you come to feel the Badlands soil, or you walk among the ponderosa pine in the hills, or, you know, wade around in the streams, that's an identity you want to identify yourself with. And so you stay there. And, or you don't want to lose your identity because that's where you're from.
I like that question, that intersection. Why do you stay? Why do you stay? I'm asking.
I'm still in the same house I was in, grew up in.
But did you have opportunities to go somewhere else?
Yes.
And you chose to stay because?
Because I think I always thought growing up and reading the National Geographic and thumbing through the encyclopedias that, boy, there was all of these incredible, beautiful places, and I wished I could go there. And I was fortunate enough to be able to go to some of those places I always thought was just, boy, that'd be the best place in the world to live. And as I've traveled, I've discovered there really, you know, that old cliche, there's no place like home. And not because it's home. I'm just convinced in my heart that I was blessed to live in one of the most beautiful places on the face of this earth. And that's truly how I feel. It is beautiful, and when I say blessed, I mean blessed. Very blessed to be here. And all the conflict and all the struggle and all of it, you'll never find any greater beauty and such a vast array of it than right here. And it's this well-kept secret.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to take a break on. I do want to make sure that we just look at the question that we'll be asking ourselves and discussing when we come back from the break. And that is, in your area of expertise, what current and future issues do the Black Hills, Badlands, and Rapid City face? And I have really appreciated some of the words that have come out in the first hour and a half of that is tension, conflict, different perspectives. And I invite us to to really now move into the present and the future. And we do have, I think, some very, very difficult and important things that the artists need to know about, that our community is facing. You've all been chosen from your perspectives and your expertise, and so let's not, as you said, Eric, let's not hide. Let's go ahead and let's speak out loud some of the things that we all know are things that we need to be facing, and the artist may have no idea about some of these things. So I invite us to be very, very frank in our conversation. I would like to invite us to take is 10 minutes enough time for you? Okay, 10, 12 minutes, and then we'll just come back. And there's some snacks, and again, thank you so much. I'm enjoying myself thoroughly. Thank you. Great, well, welcome back. And for the audience, we've unfortunately lost 2 people, but we have 6 still with us. And we're on question 3, and really the focus is from your area of expertise in terms of what you represent. And Dave, I'm going to give you the heads up. We're going to start with you. Okay?
Okay.
So we're really looking at what are the current and future issues that the Black Hills, Badlands, and Rapid City face, again, from a botanist point of view.
Okay. I only prepared 2 minutes, so we'll see. But, well, certainly, wherever you are on the planet Earth, the question for a biologist is, can we humans keep from fouling our nest? And we haven't done very well at it in various places on the planet. And the example I'd give would be Fossil Cycad National Monument in the southern Black Hills, not far from the mammoth site where these mammoths are all buried, and it's just outside of Hot Springs. There was an ancient sinkhole, and mammoths got trapped in there, and there's hundreds, if not more, mammoth skeletons. And not far away is this deposit in the Minicata, I believe, and of fossil cycads. And it was discovered about the turn of the century, and it's really one of North America's greatest concentration of these ancient plants. And it no longer exists. That is, the BLM owns a piece of property that what was the National Monument because it was pilfered out of existence. All the fossil cycads were picked, and not just by locals, but by institutions like the Smithsonian and Yale University and others who picked all the best cycads. And how neat would it be to have today a place where you can go see fossil animals and fossil plants just very close to each other. It's an opportunity that our community in the Black Hills missed because we didn't protect something when we should have. And so that certainly goes into the future. That's 2 minutes. In one quick one, as a botanist, I do have to mention invasive species. With world commerce, the Black Hills seems to attract exotic species. They do well here. If you want to find a new plant in South Dakota, you come to the Black Hills, and you'll find some new weed almost every year. And there are a variety of invasive species that, whether it's your Canada thistle in the woods outside your house or leafy spurge, and these exotics are changing the very nature of how these plant communities support animals and humans in turn. Invasive species, and I was going to say, if I could take another minute.
Well, you can do for Trudy of biology as well.
Oh, yeah. In Rapid City, in the next few weeks, we'll be marking a big anniversary for the city, a tragic anniversary. 40 years ago, the Rapid City flood occurred. And there are a few of us in South Dakota who don't remember exactly where we were when we learned about the Rapid City flood. And I was milking cows in eastern South Dakota. My aunt and uncle were living on the floodplain, and another aunt and uncle were here in the Black Hills, and barely all of them thankfully escaped the flood. But of course, hundreds were killed. And meteorologists and others who have now had 40 years to study phenomena like that recognize that floods of that magnitude have happened in the past and will happen in the future. Climate change is one of those global issues that is happening to us. I won't live long enough to see the big consequences of climate change, but they will affect living on the Great Plains. We live in a climate that can kill you now. And as much as in Western civilization and certainly Western culture, we don't let nature stand in our way. But anyone who lives on the land knows that if you're a fool, nature will kill you, whether it's a rattlesnake or a tornado or a blizzard. And we need to acknowledge that with change comes winners and losers. As a biologist, we're concerned about what species are going to be advantaged and expand with change. We don't know what climate change means for the northern Great Plains yet. We don't know whether it's going to get hotter and drier or wetter and colder. But there will be a change. And trying to figure out and anticipate what those changes will be, how we can avoid catastrophes like the Rapid City flood is motivation for all of us to just deal with this forthcoming change. That's 5.5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Craig, again, from your area of expertise, what do you see as the current and future issues that we face in our community?
Well, I think the issue that underlies everything here is land, in that we just have to understand that as a nation and as a state and as a city, that that issue of reconciling the transfer of land management from native peoples to non-native peoples hasn't reached satisfaction to all the people involved. And so on that page 2, I tried to show there in graphic form this idea of Indian land. So 16,000 years ago, or even as far as recent as 500 years ago, the Native American Old World was North America, if we're looking just at North America. No one Indian knew all of that land, but no one European knew all of the European world either. Collectively, American Indians did, then 16,000 years ago. Now, there's just little bits of islands where people are, and the same thing at that scale, that American Progress, that painting kind of depicts that idea. At the state level, we had that. And this land right here where we're at was treaty land, and this was protected. It was negotiated between the United States and Lakotas that this would be Lakota land in 1868, and it was supposed to be basically in perpetuity. And that lasted 9 years, which was a short perpetuity. But anyway, so in 1877, the U.S. government took, that's a middle of the black diagram, is in the middle there. They took the Black Hills from the Lakota people, cut the heart out of the Lakota nation. So this is where Rapid City is. That's when that was taken. Rapid City was founded in 1876. So in a way, it was founded a year before this was taken. There weren't supposed to be non-Indians in this, according to the 1868 treaty. So even by the presence of Rapid City saying it was founded in 1876 shows that they were breaking the treaty. They were illegally occupying this land. And then in 1889 is the last diagram on the left in the middle, and that's when the Great Sioux Reservation was broken up into the reservations we have today. Well, that worked out really nice for South Dakota, because 1889 is also when, in the fall, is when South Dakota and North Dakota were created from Dakota Territory. Well, all at once they had a whole bunch of land that they could sell cheaply to non-Indians. And that's what this diagram at the bottom is, the South Dakota diagram at the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. And they were advertising cheap deeded land that was part of the reservation. So this underlies what's going on here. And this history is factual. This isn't someone's emotional belief, or it's not a fairy tale. These are facts. And that, I think our state has a hard time grappling with that. And I think locally we have a hard time grappling with that. So whether or not the artists grapple with that, I'm not sure. But if we're talking about this idea of tension, this is the tension. This is the fundamental tension, that legally this land was Lakota land. Spiritually, this land was Lakota land. And now it's not. And even our Supreme Court said a more ripe and rank case of dishonorable dealings may never be found in our nation's history. That was in 1980 they wrote that. 32 years ago. So I think this is where, so we have this at the Black Hills, we have the same thing in the Badlands. And the Badlands, we're just, if you've been following the news lately, there's going to be the very first tribal national park in the United States is going to be established almost for sure down here in the Badlands. So there we see something set in motion that we could say maybe this is a procedure that we can use to go into the future. It's working there. So maybe these things will happen here. This land in Rapid City, I do not know the history very well, but where the Sioux Sanatorium is, where Siouxsan Hospital is now, that land has covenants against it, as I understand. If it's not used for certain purposes, it's supposed to revert back to tribal ownership. American Indians lived in the Gap, and they were forcibly removed to North Rapid. These are the type of histories. So this area right here where this park is probably was a lot of Indians lived around here. Tribal peoples lived here. There's not a recognition of that. There's a little park out here along the river that doesn't mention that at all. And it's supposed to purport to be the history of Rapid City. So we see Indians not being represented or presented in history in place here. So I think it's important that we do that going forward.
Thank you. Yes.
I personally, I guess, when I think about the current or future issues of the Black Hills and the Badlands and Rapid City, for me, it is preserving the aesthetic beauty of the city and the surrounding regions. For me personally, it's preserving the historic values of the lands. Right now, the ranch is facing encroachment from the city. And although progress will always prevail, you would, excuse me, you would like to see it remain somewhat undeveloped. For my father, anyway, and my promise to him, he was not a territorial man. He felt very, very blessed to be able to grow up where he did and experience all the activity that was there. And the promise was to try and hold that together for future generations to experience the same thing, the beauty of it, the value of it. And so those are the things that I personally look at, is trying to preserve that the best we can, to be true stewards of the land, even and the city too. I mean, it all goes hand in hand. To take a leap of faith and step out there and just try and do what you can to maintain the beauty of that you've been blessed with as a caregiver. And so that's probably for me, like I said, personally, issues that, I hope don't fall into the background, that stay in the forefront, that the properties, the land can be preserved and maintained, and so future generations can enjoy what I feel I've been blessed, as my father has felt blessed to, be a part of. So,
Correct.
I guess I would kind of echo what everybody has said so far, really. I think that I travel a lot for my work, and I'm very aware of how places all across the United States, at least if not around the world, are being homogenized. And you go to the suburbs of any city and you can't tell where you are. I mean, you could be in one city or the other, they've all got a Best Buy and they've all, got a Walgreens, and they feel very much alike. And I think one of the blessings of our geographical isolation is that we have a strong sense of place and a strong sense of who we are. But the pressures from a biological point of view, as David pointed out, of invasive species, the pressures of sort of global economics will be on us as we are discovered, and as in an information age, our isolation will not buffer us anymore. People will choose us because of the quality of life, and I think there will be strong pressures to kind of make us look like any other place. And so I agree with Mavis that, a big challenge will be to how to protect the things that make this place what it is, so that it remains true to itself.
What I see, some of the aspects of the current and the future issues of the Black Hills, Badlands, and Rapid City are the beginning of the loss of ceremonial use and spirituality overtaken by materialism. Even as I speak, that center I told you, Hochoka, the center, if you look on 6, the center of the Black Hills, the mound there that stands there where people went to worship, it's being developed. It's going to be developed. The roads that are projected to be up there. And there's not in that whole title to that. She's already mortgaged the place to keep it open for us. She needed last count about over $1 million in order to buy off the mortgage she had, the peace really buying around her. And she was fighting a losing battle, but she got some help, but temporary. So I see the beginning of loss if it's being developed by all these roads. I think they'll have impact, tremendous impact on the ceremonies that we do up there. And once again, the owners that access the land around it will put in guidelines and rules that we have to abide by. And so it's I see that the spirituality of the place eroding because of the development, the amount of developments going on in that area. Also, the Badlands, same areas. The more tourism you have, the more trails. Last time I went there about a couple of years ago to walk on these trails, a lot of people walking off it. And there's a plan to develop more motels. So when I see that, it's just kind of it's disheartening when you see the beginning of these activities for name of materialism, and then loss of spirituality and the ceremonial use of the land. It's hard unless we begin to overturn that. Tribes need a lot of help. We must go out and be able to seek help from maybe non-Indian benefactors to help stabilize them. Because the loss of all that is really the beginning of the loss of really the environment. They projected that the Missouri River will dry up within 40 years, just a trickle, which means that the aquifer will be impacted by the loss of all the glaciation that's melting quickly. There'll be a tremendous struggle for land resources here on the reservations. The Rosebud primaries sit on the rim of that overall aquifer. So I see the beginning of the fight for it. You see. That's where we start our cultural resource management. We got a bachelor's in science, and then we're moving for masters. So we teach our youth how to manage those. So it don't look well. I just kind of harken back to when Black Elk and Brown Hat went to the Black Hills in the 1880s. Brown Hat envisioned that the Black Hills would be sold. And he projected about $10 million is what he projected. And he said that we'll also buy bottled water, we'll buy water. The thing that was a commodity is no longer going to be accessible to us. You know? So when I look at that, it's disheartening. I look at, my grandchildren, what they have to live through. There's a dream that someday we'll get peace of Black Hills back, as we nearly succeeded one time in '84. But one thing that we're now looking for is a partnership with the park services to help stabilize that. And that could be the 10 or 15 sites that we could get them back into, based on spirituality. But again, it's disheartening when you go up to do the welcome back to ceremony. You see all these tourists coming taking pictures. You go to Devil's Tower, and I bite my lip every time I say Devil's Tower. No, I'm a told people that when you go there, you can't do your ceremonies the way you want them because you have tourists taking pictures. Insensitivity of it. In botany, we're losing sage. And it's up to botanists to figure out how we can prolong those. On reservations dying out, we don't want to genetically engineer them because plants that we have that are grown naturally have power. The ones that man-made does not. So that's going to be a thing that we have to look forward to in the future. What's going to happen? But to me, I've not given up hope that the key thing is education. Maybe even in sculpture. The beauty of sculpture is how we value the land, you see, and put image of it in there. Maybe that'll help, educating the brochures, the people, and be able to unite the people in battling the overrunning of materialism that seems to not be gaining. Somehow I can't, we have a tourism department at Rosebud. It's pretty well, no matter how many directors that ran it, eventually they got fired or quit. And, there's really, in our reservation, there's really no room for that. But I see that thriving, and that's probably, it's thriving here because that's where the income comes. I realize that now, that income is very important. So the jobs can be held, but at the cost of spirituality, I don't think so. So in the end, we have to tighten our belts and look to the future, how we can best come together, seek alliances with non-union groups, environmentalists. And we did that battle with the forest here that we're joined with environmentalists in saving the log industry. And, that's where we need to go and invite more people to come and join us to see what we're doing, how we can save the environment. And I think it's the Christianity has to come and help because they disrupt a lot of that. They must come in and help them, see, in our endeavors to restore the environment, the spirituality of the place. So again, our tribal members are going to look ahead and see a rough time. But I think we may persevere. We may, because of Maui's looking at the bright side of it. Although get shot down a lot of times. But, so that's what I envision.
Thank you. Catherine?
I think that a current and future issue is Black Hills area is not alone in this issue. It's around us in many places, and you hear phrases like The American people have loved their national parks to death, and that's just a quick. I've heard it said about Yosemite and so on, and parts of Yellowstone, and so I think we know what could happen if we don't start being very careful in how we manage both the development here in the Black Hills in terms of people that come and live and stay and work and so on, and then the visitors. And I think that, and I'm picking up a little on what Victor said, but I think water is kind of the canary in the mine shaft in this regard. There's this, we're short on water. We're kind of in a desert here, and yet I think that very few people recognize the water issues that we have, and are only going to, get worse as the pressures on that water increases, because we have, we drill these deep wells into the Madison Aquifer, and we think that that's unlimited. Well, it isn't unlimited. And what is done on the surface with the geology and the forestry and all these other areas will really have a great effect on how much of the water runs off and how much goes in and how much gets utilized by the trees and the plants and ends up in the atmosphere. So there's this balance where we need to be very mindful of to keep not only the aquifer recharged, but enough water running off in our streams for to take care of some of our aquifers as well as the agricultural needs. So this water balance is just absolutely critical, and I keep a pretty close eye on the decisions that get made locally about how development is being happened in the Black Hills, because we really can't support the number of people that probably want to come here over some time, and so I think that if we get that right, and I'm optimistic, of course, that we will, because Rapid City or Pennington County did a major thing the last few years with this septic inspection ordinance, and of course it was objected. There were a lot of objections, and it took them multiple years to get it done. But that's a small step, but it's a step that recognizes the interdependency about what people do on the surface and the water that we need, and so it's. I think we're starting along the right path, but it's something that really has to be well thought through and well cared for. And at some point, that we can only sustain some certain load of animals and people on the area, and we really need to be respectful of that.
Anything else that anyone, before we move to our last question, which is again, any last words? This is a chance for, and we're not going to go around. You can just say, we'll just go as people feel that they would like to say something, which would be something you think would be very important for the artists that are going to be watching this. And I think that for those artists that are very, very serious about wanting to put a proposal together, they are going to be hopefully really listening to what you have to say. Last things that you would like to say to the artists before we end our time together.
I think I'd like to say that although this sounds very complex and very conflicting and difficult, it is a beautiful, beautiful area. There's as much or more positive than there is negative. But it is very complex and it is very diverse. And from an artist's perspective, that's a real plus. Because there is so much to draw from for inspiration. So I hope as they are listening to all of this that they don't feel too overwhelmed by what they're hearing, good and bad. But those are all of the things, all of that good and bad that makes this so uniquely unto itself. And unless they've been here and actually experienced it, I'm sure it's very hard for them to imagine what all of us are talking about at this little round table today. So
Thanks, Mavis. Yes, Dave.
One thing to the artist. If any of you are planning some realistic portrayal of something here in the hills, I do have to tell a story about the movie Dances with Wolves was filmed in South Dakota, and I might be opening a can of worms here, but there's a scene in this movie where this formation of majestic birds in a beautiful sky flies over and honks of Canada geese. And the problem was they were double-crested cormorants who just squawk like frogs. And, 90% of the people, still saw that as a beautiful scene and inspiring. But the 10% of us that knew the difference were really bugged by stuff like that. So, we've tried to provide bibliographies and information on details. If you're, having a predator chase a red squirrel up a tree, make it a pine marten and not a fisher. But that was, we have resources at your disposal for some of the details. And it'd make at least 10% of us feel better.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dave.
I like to pick up on that in a way. But first of all, and it's this idea of doing things accurately, is that the cultural history of Rapid City, of South Dakota, of the United States, and even of the Western Hemisphere is going to be read into their work. Now, not everyone's going to read that in, but the critical thinkers are, the 10%. They're going to read this in. And we can see these examples of the past through these paintings that I try to use as exemplars here of people who maybe they weren't intending this, but you can read in American progress. You can read in American Indians, in this case, being these unenlightened, wild people scurrying from the bright light of divine right. That's American progress. You can read in these savages insistently impeding progress in the spirit of the West. I hope we don't end up with that. We've had to cover up, we South Dakotans cover up this second piece of work. It's in the state capitol, but it's covered up because it's inappropriate. And part of the challenge and the charge to these artists is to do art that is appropriate for all ages and all peoples. So be aware, be thinking. It's not just to let the rock manifest itself. No, you engage your brain and do art here that is going to somehow say something. Whether you want it to say it or not, it's going to be read as saying things. So I think that's important. And I like this idea of Norman Rockwell. That painting is called his triple self-portrait. And that's what we have to have, is this reflexive process of creating artistic work, so that it is not just one person's viewpoint. This is public art for the people of this region. It is not one person's or one segment of society's work. If these artists have critical thinking, we won't end up with mascot or Dances with Wolves type of stuff. And that's what I think we really want to make sure doesn't. Well, at least I hope we don't end up with that. Those type of just errors, just write out errors or insulting stereotypes.
Thank you, Craig. The thing that I'd like to, the final message that I have is that Rapid City isn't located where it is by accident. Rapid City is located where it is because of that geographic location has had significance for a very, very, very long time. And I believe I heard Victor say that Rapid City is one of the few entrances into the Black Hills that your people have used for all your history. He mentioned that it's located in the racetrack, which has vast implications because the racetrack was this smooth area that surrounds the Black Hills, geologically formed, but it was the transportation corridor around the Black Hills. Rapid City, most recently in the late 1800s, was based here because it was the perfect spot between supplying the activities, primarily mining, in the Black Hills, the services and supplies that were needed, and the prairies where things grew. You know, it's called hay camp for a reason. I mean, they produced the hay for all the livestock that was needed for the burgeoning enterprise. So there's, Rapid City's location means something in itself, and it's through all these years it's been the anchor, that supplies this entire region. And then the other thing I'd say is that, and I frequently try to remind myself of this, but there are days that I forget, and that is that, every day we should, remind ourselves not to take what we have for granted here. And I think that that's not only what we see out the window or see when we're out walking around, but, our rich past, both from the geological perspective and the cultural perspective. And so and back to what Eric said earlier, is that first and foremost, the artwork needs to speak to the locals. And I think if it made a message to the locals so that every day, every time we saw it, we were reminded never to take this for granted, it would be a success.
Thank you, Catherine.
I would just agree with almost what everyone said. I mean, I think that, we've been very literal in a lot of ways, imparting from, our knowledge bases. And in the end, I hope this is not. It doesn't, kind of as what David was saying, I think there's so many risks in trying to develop something that becomes a very literal interpretation. And so, the next part, which is the creative genius, is sort of outside of my realm, to create a thing in space that has physical presence is not something that I'm very attuned to. But I think that's where that what the artists bring to the table needs to take over.
Thank you. Victor, last words to the artists.
The sculptors, I would really say to them that they should look at study the region hard with all the materials that you're getting. And they have to settle on a theme, probably a theme of reconciliation. It's looking at, the Rapid City Black Hills, it's a unique place in the world, the most unique, because it's shaped like a heart. It's got some ruleless landforms in it. And it's near the geographical center of North America. As the tectonic plates moved, it moved with it, slightly off now, but that's the center that used to be right there. So they got a unique place, unique things, study it hard, and be able to look at all aspects of it. The non-inner side, what's the value? What's the value on the other side? So you're trying to blend two worlds together, and I can't tell them what to do, how to sculpt whatever, but it's up to them, when I was sitting on Treaty Council, they had a contest to make a image or monument, a really big one. And the guy that won it had that reconciliation of the spirit world of warriors and the cavalry coming together at a gate. And that won. I thought that most of our treaty people disagree with that, but I thought it looked pretty good to me. But it did win, and it eventually was made that way. So I'd like to see something like that, that theme of reconciliation of the heart of everything that is. And I think that'll it'll be hard, but the bar is pretty high. But that they could think about that. Maybe come up with something authentic, something that's not really fake. So that's the advice I give them. Just go ahead and study it hard. Come up with something spiritual. Reconciliation. The heart of everything that is.
Well, I want to thank each of you for coming here today and spending time together with me and with the audience that we don't have here today, but will be watching this video. And I am very honored to have been part of this conversation. I learned some things that I did not know, and I want to thank you so much for all of your participation. And I'm sure I'm conveying the same thoughts from both Pat and from Mary and from the committee. So thank you very much for your time, and I think we're done.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.